The envelope looked ordinary: thick cream paper, a government return address, and my full legal name printed in precise black ink. It sat in my mailbox like any other piece of mail, yet something about it made my chest tighten before I even picked it up. After years in federal service, you develop an instinct for trouble. This felt like it. I carried it inside without opening it, placing it carefully on the kitchen table as if it might explode. My apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic below. For several minutes, I just stared at the envelope, trying to convince myself it was routine, a clearance update, a compliance form, maybe a random audit notice. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I slit the top open with a butter knife and pulled out the folded documents. The words blurred at first, my eyes refusing to process what they saw. Notice of Security Clearance Review. My stomach dropped. I kept reading. The letter stated that my clearance status had been formally challenged due to allegations questioning my loyalty, financial disclosures, and foreign contacts. Pending investigation, my access to classified systems and facilities could be suspended. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped to the second page. Source of complaint: immediate family members. The air left my lungs. For a moment, the room felt too small, the walls pressing inward. I sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. My family? The same people I hadn't spoken to in years? The same people who had called my career, pretending to be important, and accused me of abandoning them when I left home? Why would they do this? In my line of work, suspicion alone could destroy a career built over decades. Clearance investigations weren't casual reviews. They were surgical examinations of your life, finances, travel, relationships, and personal history. Friends disappeared. Promotions vanished. Trust evaporated. Even if you were cleared, the shadow could linger. I stood and paced the kitchen, trying to slow my breathing. Memories surfaced uninvited. My mother's cold silence the day I left for training, my brother calling me a traitor for refusing to share details of my work, the bitter argument after my father's funeral when inheritance tensions fractured what little remained of our relationship. Still, this was different. This was war. I returned to the table and read the letter again, forcing myself to absorb every word. I had 14 days to respond and appear for a formal review. Failure to comply would result in immediate suspension. My phone buzzed on the counter, an automated alert from work. My building access had been temporarily restricted pending administrative review. It was already happening. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back into the envelope, and stared out the window at the gray morning sky. Somewhere beyond the clouds were satellites I had helped safeguard, systems I had protected, missions I had supported without ever speaking their names. And now, the greatest threat to my career hadn't come from a foreign adversary. It had come from my own family. The next morning, the elevator ride to my office felt longer than usual. No one spoke. Two analysts who normally greeted me with casual jokes stared at the floor display instead, as if my reflection in the metal doors might contaminate them. By the time I reached my floor, the rumors had already spread. My access badge, once a symbol of trust, triggered a yellow warning light instead of green. The security guard gave a polite but strained smile. "Temporary administrative review," he said quietly. "You can proceed, but some areas are restricted." Restricted. The word echoed in my mind like a verdict. Inside the office, conversations died as I walked past. Computer screens flicked to neutral documents. A project manager who had relied on me for years suddenly became fascinated with his coffee mug. In environments built on classified trust, suspicion spreads faster than truth. I logged into my workstation. A notification banner appeared. Access level modified, pending investigation. Several secure folders were locked. My active assignments had been reassigned overnight. Just like that, I had gone from mission critical to potential liability. An email from internal security waited in my inbox, marked priority. You are required to submit a written response addressing the allegations listed in the attached document. Failure to provide sufficient clarification may result in suspension or revocation of clearance privileges. I opened the attachment. The accusations were more detailed than the letter had suggested. Unreported contact with foreign nationals. Financial irregularities suggesting outside influence. Failure to disclose international travel. Questionable loyalty indicators based on personal associations. I stared at the screen, stunned. Every claim was either distorted or entirely false. The foreign contacts were diplomats present at a multilateral conference I attended with full authorization. The financial irregularities were transfers connected to medical expenses for my late father. The undisclosed travel had been government-directed movement under classified orders. Someone had taken fragments of truth and twisted them into suspicion. And in my profession, perception could be more damaging than reality. My phone buzzed. A message from my supervisor.
Come see me.
His office door was half open when I arrived. He gestured for me to sit, but didn't offer his usual reassuring smile. This is serious, he said, folding his hands. Clearance challenges from family members carry emotional weight. Investigators assume they may know things others don't. They don't, I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. He studied me for a moment. I believe you. But belief isn't evidence. Document everything. Every trip. Every transfer. Every name. I nodded. As I stood to leave, he added quietly, until this is resolved, trust will be limited. Limited trust. In our world, that was nearly the same as none. Back at my desk, I began assembling my defense. Travel logs. Authorization codes. Banking statements. Medical invoices. Conference credentials. Years of records spilled across my screen like pieces of a life dissected. Yet beneath the paperwork and procedures, a heavier question lingered. Why would my family go this far? We had argued. We had drifted apart. But filing a complaint that could destroy my career required intention, effort, and malice. At noon, I walked to the break room, only to find it suddenly empty. A conversation that had been lively seconds earlier had relocated elsewhere. Isolation settled around me like cold air. For the first time in my career, I understood how quickly trust could evaporate, not because of proven wrongdoing, but because doubt had been introduced. And doubt, once planted, is hard to erase. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents and the soft glow of my laptop screen. Outside, the city moved as it always did, traffic flowing, people laughing somewhere in the distance, life continuing without pause. Inside, time felt frozen. I should have been organizing evidence. Instead, I was remembering. I hadn't spoken to my family in nearly 5 years. Distance had not come suddenly. It had grown slowly, like a crack spreading through glass. When I first entered federal service, my mother told the neighbors I worked in an office somewhere, as if my career were something to hide. My brother mocked the secrecy, accusing me of pretending to be important. What do you even do? He had demanded once. I can't discuss it, I replied. That answer became the beginning of every argument. To them, silence meant arrogance. To me, silence meant duty. Things worsened when my father became ill. I transferred money home regularly, covering medical bills without hesitation. I took leave when I could, sitting beside his hospital bed, listening to machines breathe for him. But when he passed, grief turned into accusation. You think money replaces being here, my brother said during the funeral. I had no answer that would satisfy him. The final fracture came weeks later, when my father's modest property became a source of dispute. I suggested selling it and dividing the funds equally. My relatives insisted I wanted control, convinced my government career meant hidden wealth and secret influence. Voices rose. Old resentment surfaced. Words were said that cannot be taken back. That was the last day I saw them. Since then, birthdays passed in silence. Holidays arrived and left unnoticed. I told myself the distance was necessary, even healthy. My work required focus, discipline, and emotional stability. Family conflict had no place in a life built on precision and trust. Yet now, as I stared at the clearance complaint on my screen, their absence felt different. This wasn't estrangement. This was retaliation. I replayed old conversations in my mind, searching for clues I had missed. Had their resentment truly grown strong enough to risk destroying my career? Did they believe the accusations, or had they filed them simply to hurt me? My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Submit preliminary response. 13 days remaining. Time was moving whether I was ready or not. I stood and walked to the window. The glass reflected a stranger back at me, tired eyes, tense shoulders, someone who had spent years protecting national security but now stood defenseless against personal betrayal. In intelligence work, threats are studied, categorized, and anticipated. But betrayal from your own blood is different. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly in a cream-colored envelope. I turned back to the table, pushing memories aside. Whatever their motives, I couldn't afford distraction. Every document I prepared, every fact I verified, every timeline I reconstructed would determine not only my clearance, but my future. Still, one thought lingered, heavier than the rest. Foreign adversaries had tried to breach systems I protected and failed. My family, however, had found a way inside my life with a single accusation, and the damage had only begun. By the third day, the investigation was no longer a quiet administrative matter. It had become a visible reality shaping every moment of my workday. My badge still opened the main entrance, but the side corridors leading to secure operations now denied access with a sharp red flash. Doors that once opened automatically remained sealed. Each denial felt less like a procedural restriction and more like a silent accusation. Inside the office, my responsibilities evaporated one task at a time. An encrypted briefing I had been scheduled to deliver was reassigned. A classified systems review I led for 2 years moved to another team. My name quietly disappeared from distribution lists. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. In high-security environments, trust is currency. Once questioned, it is frozen until proven valid again. Late that morning, an investigator from internal security arrived at my desk. He was polite, professional, and emotionally neutral, the kind of neutrality developed by people who examine others for a living. "I'll need to verify some details," he said. He asked about travel dates from 3 years ago, then about a conference in Vienna, then about a bank transfer that occurred the week my father entered intensive care. Every question was precise. Every answer had to be exact. "Did you have contact with any foreign nationals outside official meetings?"
No.
"Did you receive any gifts, compensation, or favors?"
No.
"Did you disclose all interactions in your post-travel report?" "Yes." He wrote without reacting. The interview lasted 40 minutes. When he stood to leave, he offered a brief nod, neither reassuring nor alarming. "We may follow up." That was all. By afternoon, word had spread beyond my floor. A colleague from another department texted, "Heard about your clearance. Hope it clears up." Hope. Not confidence. Not certainty. Just hope. I spent the rest of the day assembling documentation. My dining table at home had become a command center. Folders labeled by year, bank statements arranged chronologically, travel authorizations matched with itineraries, and conference credentials cross-referenced with official attendance lists. Every page represented a fragment of my life under examination. The burden wasn't only professional, it was psychological. Knowing strangers would examine my finances, personal relationships, and movements felt like standing under a spotlight with nowhere to hide. That evening, my supervisor called. "The review panel has scheduled your formal clearance interview," he said. "It will take place at the Pentagon." Even though I had expected it, hearing the words made my pulse quicken. "When?" I asked. 10 days. 10 days to prove my integrity. 10 days to dismantle allegations built from resentment and half-truths. After the call ended, I sat in silence, absorbing the weight of what lay ahead. The Pentagon interview wasn't merely procedural, it was decisive. Careers survived or ended in rooms like that. Outside my window, dusk settled over the city, shadows stretching across streets and buildings. Lights flickered on one by one, illuminating offices where people continued their routines, unaware that my world had narrowed to a single objective: prove the truth. Clear my name. protect the career I had built through years of discipline and sacrifice. Yet as I organized the final stack of documents, a sobering realization settled in. This investigation was not just about facts. It was about trust. And trust, once questioned, must be rebuilt piece by piece. The moment the interview date was confirmed, my world narrowed into a single objective: preparation. 10 days. 10 days to defend years of service, integrity, and sacrifice. I began treating my apartment like an operational planning center. Every surface held documents: travel authorizations, deployment summaries, financial records, medical invoices, and communication logs. I created timelines mapping my movements year by year, ensuring every date matched official records. In my profession, precision is survival. Now, it was my defense. Each allegation required documented proof. Foreign contacts, official conference attendee lists, and diplomatic clearance memos. Financial irregularities, hospital invoices, insurance statements, and wire confirmations tied to my father's treatment. Undisclosed travel, classified movement orders, and supervisor authorizations. Loyalty concerns, commendations, performance reviews, and operational evaluations. The facts were on my side. But facts alone didn't guarantee trust. At work, my isolation deepened. Conversations stopped when I entered shared spaces. My remaining assignments were administrative and temporary, tasks given to someone awaiting judgment. Even those who believed in my integrity maintained distance, as if proximity to suspicion could damage them too. Clearance culture teaches caution above loyalty. One afternoon, I met with a clearance attorney assigned to advise me through the process. She reviewed my documentation with careful efficiency. "You are not proving innocence," she explained. "You are demonstrating reliability. Investigators want consistency, transparency, and emotional stability." She paused, then added, "Do not appear defensive. Do not speculate about motives. Answer only what is asked." I nodded, absorbing every word. "Why would family members file this complaint?" she asked. The question lingered between us. "Inheritance dispute," I said finally. "Long-standing resentment. Estrangement." She studied my face. "State facts, not feelings," she advised. "Investigators evaluate behavior, not emotion." That night, I practiced answering questions aloud, forcing my voice to remain steady, neutral, precise. "Where were you on March 14th? Who authorized your Vienna travel? Why were funds transferred on April 22nd? Did you report all foreign contacts?" Each answer had to be immediate and exact. Sleep became shallow and fragmented. My mind replayed potential questions, searching for gaps in memory, inconsistencies in timelines, or overlooked details that could raise suspicion. 3 days before the interview, my supervisor stopped by my desk. He placed a folder beside my keyboard. "Performance commendations," he said. "They may help establish reliability." I looked up, surprised. "For what it's worth," he added quietly, "your reputation here is strong." It was the closest thing to reassurance anyone had offered. That evening, I reviewed the commendations. Phrases like exceptional judgment, unflinching integrity, and mission-critical reliability filled the pages. They felt like descriptions of someone else. Because in 10 days, a panel of investigators would decide whether that person still existed. The night before my departure, I packed a single briefcase. Inside were neatly labeled folders, identification documents, and a notebook containing timelines and key dates. No unnecessary items. No distractions. Preparation was control. Control was calm. And calm was essential. As I turned off the lights and prepared for a few hours of restless sleep, one thought settled heavily in my mind. Tomorrow I would walk into one of the most secure buildings in the world, not as a trusted insider, but as a subject under review. And everything I had built could hinge on what happened inside that room. The morning air outside the Pentagon was crisp, carrying a sharp tang of anticipation that made my pulse race. I arrived early, allowing myself time to pass through layers of security with careful patience. Metal detectors, ID verification, and biometric scans were routine, yet today, each checkpoint felt like a test, each guard's glance a silent evaluation of my worth. I clutched my briefcase, organized meticulously the night before. Every folder, every document, every timeline had been reviewed dozens of times. I reminded myself, preparation was my shield, discipline my weapon. Yet as I approached the conference room, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The doors opened, revealing a stark, fluorescent-lit room. A long table dominated the center, chairs arranged with military precision. At the far end sat a man in civilian attire, posture straight, face unreadable. He was the clearance investigator, the one who would determine whether my career continued or ended. "Good morning," he said, motioning to a chair. I nodded and sat. He opened a thick file and began reviewing my documents silently. Paper shuffled, pen scratched. Occasionally, his eyes flicked up to study me, scanning for expressions, reactions, micro-gestures that might betray inconsistency or nervousness. I met his gaze evenly, keeping my hands folded on the table. "Let's begin," he said finally, and the question started. "Where were you on specific dates of travel? Who did you meet? Were there any unreported interactions?" Each query was precise. Each answer required exact recall. I spoke clearly, concisely, sticking strictly to documented facts. Halfway through, he paused, flipping to a page in the file that made my heart skip a beat. "I recognize this operation," he said quietly, almost to himself. I froze. "Which operation?" I asked cautiously. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing as he studied me. "The classified mission in Eastern Europe, the one involving intelligence coordination during the breach attempt," he finally said. "I oversaw that operation." My pulse spiked. That mission was strictly need to know. Even in briefings, only a handful of people knew the full scope. How could he recognize my involvement? "You prevented a critical security failure," he continued. "Your actions were documented, but the public files never reflected the severity. Few people outside command know the truth." Relief and tension collided. For the first time, I felt someone outside the investigation understood the stakes and my role in them. My training, my sacrifice, my integrity finally acknowledged. And yet, the scrutiny continued. Questions shifted back to family, finances, foreign contacts, loyalty. Each answer was delivered with precision. I remained calm, neutral, disciplined, but inside, a spark of vindication glimmered. The room remained tense, silent except for shuffling papers and the occasional click of a pen. Outside, the Pentagon hummed with its usual activity, unaware that one officer's career teetered on the balance. By the time the interview ended, I had survived the initial storm. My facts were laid bare, my record defended. But one truth remained painfully clear. This was only the beginning. Tomorrow, the deeper questions would be answered. The motives behind the complaint, the family betrayal, the lines between blood and loyalty. And the consequences, whether vindication or ruin, would be absolute. The interview room had gone silent for a few minutes, the kind of quiet that makes every sound, a cough, the scratch of a pen, feel amplified. I thought I was prepared for every question, every cross-examination, every probe into my past. But then he said something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "I know this operation," the investigator said, his voice low, deliberate. My pulse skipped. "I don't follow," I said cautiously. He didn't elaborate immediately. He leaned forward, eyes scanning my face, as if trying to measure a hidden truth. Then, almost like a confession, he continued. "The Eastern Europe counterintelligence mission from 2019. The one with the data breach that could have compromised NATO communications." I froze. That mission was classified at the highest level, need to know only. I had never mentioned it to anyone, not a single detail, not even in debriefs that were cleared for review. Only a few officers were aware of the full operation. How could he know? He opened the file again, flipping to the internal report that had been marked as confidential. "You're listed here as the officer whose actions prevented a catastrophic failure," he said. "This file is under strict classification." I know because I oversaw intelligence coordination during that operation. I felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. Relief, because my role in the mission had been recognized by someone who understood its importance. Disbelief, because even in a room filled with scrutiny, someone else had access to the truth, a truth that the rest of the investigators might never grasp. The realization hit me. I wasn't just defending myself from vague accusations. I was defending documented excellence, actions that had prevented disaster, actions only a few would ever know. You did more than follow protocol, he continued, his tone neutral but firm. You anticipated the breach and contained it before anyone noticed. That's not just adherence. That's judgment, decisiveness, and skill. For the first time that day, I allowed myself a brief exhale. My training, my years of disciplined service, and my sacrifices weren't invisible. They mattered. They had meaning beyond the accusation-laden letter from my family. But he leaned back, pen in hand, and asked the next question, the one that reminded me this wasn't over. Why did your family file the complaint? I swallowed hard. All the data, reports, and evidence couldn't answer that. Only the truth about resentment, estrangement, and malice could. The tension returned, heavier than before. Recognition of my work had arrived, but the reason I was here, the personal betrayal, remained unresolved. I realized then, the battle wasn't just about proving I was qualified or trustworthy. It was about uncovering why those closest to me had become the threat itself. And in that room, I knew the real test was only beginning. After the brief pause, the investigator closed the classified file with deliberate care. His eyes met mine again, sharp but measured. There was a weight in the room that went beyond procedure, a recognition, almost respect, for what I had accomplished. You prevented a failure that could have compromised multiple Allied operations, he said quietly. The reports we have on record don't reflect the full scope. Only someone who understands the mission in depth could make sense of the decisions you made. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Years of sleepless nights, calculated risks, and silent sacrifices were hidden behind a veil of secrecy. Now someone understood, and that understanding carried power. He leaned forward, flipping to another page of the file. Your role was not just procedural. You identified the breach early, coordinated mitigation, and ensured data integrity without ever alerting the public or exposing your team unnecessarily. That required judgment few officers possess. For a moment, I allowed myself a spark of quiet pride. My career had always demanded precision, vigilance, and discretion. Here was acknowledgement that my choices had mattered, that my service had real impact. But the acknowledgement didn't erase the core issue. He looked up and asked the question that had been hanging over me since the complaint. Why would your family file this complaint? I recounted the events leading up to the filing, the bitter disputes over inheritance after my father's death, lingering resentment, and long-standing estrangement. I didn't embellish or accuse. I simply stated the facts. Their actions were motivated by personal grievance, not concern for security. The investigator listened carefully, taking notes but saying nothing. Finally, he nodded slowly. It appears the complaint may have been influenced by motives outside standard security concerns, he said. Malicious intent can compromise the credibility of allegations. A subtle shift occurred in the room. Recognition of my work had built a foundation. Acknowledgement of their motives began to tilt the balance in my favor. My defense was no longer only about facts, it was about context, intent, and understanding human behavior. He paused, then added, your documents, timelines, and evidence corroborate your account. With the mission records included, there is strong support for reliability and integrity. Your actions during the classified operation demonstrate the highest professional standards. I felt a mixture of relief and lingering tension. Relief, because the truth of my service was recognized. Tension, because the formal review was not yet over, and the report still needed to pass through multiple levels. As I left the room, I realized something profound. The accusation had forced me to relive old wounds, organize my life with obsessive precision, and face personal betrayal head-on. Yet it had also reminded me of my strength, competence, and resilience. qualities that no letter or complaint could erase. Walking through the Pentagon's long corridors, I felt a strange calm. I had defended my actions, revealed the motives behind the attack, and reminded myself and the system that loyalty, skill, and integrity could withstand even the sharpest betrayal. Outside, the sun reflected off the concrete walls, bright and unyielding. Tomorrow would bring final deliberations, but today I had reclaimed a measure of control. And in a world built on secrecy, control was everything. The following days were a blur of waiting. I returned to my apartment and resumed meticulous documentation, triple-checking every page, every statement, and every log I had prepared. My mind couldn't stop circling the same question: why had my own family become the source of this investigation? It wasn't enough that I was skilled, trusted, and disciplined. The accusations weren't random. They had a target, a motive, and that target was me. Finally, during a scheduled follow-up session, the investigator addressed the heart of the matter. He laid out a clear timeline linking my family's grievances to the complaint: a property dispute after my father's death, lingering resentment over my career success, long-standing estrangement that had only deepened over time. It appears the allegations are less about security and more about personal conflict, he said. The complaint coincides with events that could trigger financial or emotional dissatisfaction. There is evidence suggesting malicious intent. Hearing it stated so plainly was almost surreal. For years, I had wondered if my family's silence was indifference or avoidance. Now I realized it had been deliberate, strategic, and calculated. They had waited for an opportunity to strike, and they had found it. I explained the details calmly and factually: inheritance disputes, arguments over property, and their perception of my career as a source of envy rather than pride. Every piece of evidence, bank statements, email trails, witness accounts, supported my explanation. The investigator listened attentively, then nodded. Intent is a key factor in evaluating allegations. Malicious motives weaken the credibility of claims, especially when your documented record contradicts them. I exhaled, a mix of relief and lingering disbelief. My family had weaponized the system against me, yet the very system they tried to exploit was beginning to vindicate me. Outside the interview room, I walked through the Pentagon halls with a sense of cautious optimism. I was still under scrutiny, but the nature of the challenge had shifted. The facts had been established. Now the focus was on motive. For the first time since receiving that envelope, I felt a flicker of control. My professional reputation, built over years of dedication, was not only intact but now bolstered by the acknowledgement of my integrity. Yet a lesson lingered, uncomfortably clear: blood does not always equal loyalty. And sometimes, the people you expect to protect you can become the source of your greatest trial. As I left the building that day, sunlight catching the sharp edges of the Pentagon walls, I knew one truth above all: the system may have recognized my skill and dedication, but personal betrayal cuts deeper than any official review. And I was prepared to face it, head-on, with every fact, every record, and every hard-earned piece of evidence to back me up. Tomorrow, the final decision would come. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. I had faced suspicion, isolation, and family betrayal, and I had survived. I was not defeated.
Not yet.
Days later, a formal letter arrived. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the envelope. The words were clear, precise, and official. My security clearance had been fully reinstated. The report cited the malicious intent behind the complaint. Every document, every timeline, every fact I had painstakingly prepared was validated. The system, impartial, meticulous, and unyielding, had recognized the truth. I exhaled a long breath, a mixture of relief and lingering tension. The threat was over, at least officially. Colleagues who had avoided me now offered cautious congratulations. Access to classified systems was restored, projects reassigned, and my professional standing affirmed. But the experience had left a mark deeper than paperwork could show. I had faced accusations crafted from personal betrayal, investigated every aspect of my life under the microscope of the most secure institution in the nation, and emerged intact. Yet the lessons went beyond procedure and protocol. Trust, I realized, is fragile. It can be eroded not only by enemies abroad, but by those closest to you. Blood does not guarantee loyalty. Family can wound as deeply as any adversary. As I returned to my office, I reflected on the Pentagon investigator's words. Recognition of my skill and judgment had balanced the personal betrayal. The truth of one's actions is sometimes hidden in classified files, unseen by the public, but it exists, immutable and undeniable. I organized my desk, stacking the documents I had prepared during the investigation. They would remain, not as evidence of vulnerability, but as a testament to my diligence, resilience, and commitment. The incident left me wiser. I knew now that integrity cannot rely solely on trust from others. It must be maintained, defended, and demonstrated, especially when challenged. And when betrayal comes, the response must be precise, disciplined, and unwavering. That evening, I paused by the window, looking out over the city. The lights shimmered like constellations, each one steady despite the night's darkness. I realized that despite the turbulence, despite family conflict and institutional scrutiny, I had maintained my course. Some doors, once closed, may never reopen. Some relationships may remain fractured. But one thing remained untouchable: my dedication, my competence, and my integrity. In the end, the system had recognized what I already knew. Loyalty to duty, clarity of purpose, and adherence to truth outweigh every accusation. Family may share your blood, but integrity defines your true allegiance. And with that, I returned to my work, stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever. The trials had tested me, and I had passed.